Story 1. My name is Lily, and I've always had a way with kids. So, when I started college, I decided to take up babysitting to earn some extra cash. Little did I know that one particular babysitting job would turn into a nightmarish descent into darkness. It was a stormy Friday night when I received a call from Mrs. Anderson, a friendly woman in her 40s with 2 children, Lucy, aged 7, and Mark, aged 5. She explained that her regular babysitter had canceled at the last minute, and she desperately needed someone to watch the kids while she attended a family emergency. Feeling sympathetic, I agreed to help out, despite the torrential rain and the eerie atmosphere outside. Mrs. Anderson sounded relieved and told me that she'd be back by midnight. She assured me that Lucy and Mark were well behaved and already tucked into bed. When I arrived at their suburban home, the heavy rain had turned the neighborhood streets into a river of glistening asphalt. Mrs. Anderson quickly introduced me to the children, who were playing quietly in the living room. Lucy had fiery red hair and a shy smile, while Mark was a bundle of energy, his big brown eyes filled with curiosity. Mrs. Anderson rushed through the list of instructions, making sure I knew where everything was and reminding me that bedtime was at 8. She looked visibly stressed but assured me that the kids were easy to manage. As soon as Mrs. Anderson left, I decided to occupy the kids with a movie, hoping to distract them from the ominous storm outside. We settled in the living room, and as the movie played, their giggles and laughter filled the air. It was shaping up to be a straightforward babysitting gig. At around 7:30, I ushered the kids to their rooms to prepare for bedtime. Lucy and Mark brushed their teeth and put on their pajamas with minimal fuss. As I tucked them into their beds, I could tell they were growing drowsy from the movie. With the children settled, I made my way to the living room to relax on the couch, waiting for their parents to return. The storm outside raged on, with thunder and lightning providing a dramatic backdrop to the evening. As the clock ticked past 8, I heard a faint sound coming from the children's room. It was a soft whisper, like the rustling of leaves in the wind. I assumed one of the kids was talking to themselves as they drifted off to sleep and thought nothing of it. But the whispering continued, growing louder and more insistent. It didn't sound like the innocent mutterings of a child, it sounded sinister, filled with malice. I shivered and felt a growing unease as the voices seemed to multiply, like a chorus of shadows. Unable to ignore it any longer, I got up and tiptoed to the children's room. I cracked the door open and peered inside. Lucy and Mark were sound asleep, their breathing steady, and their faces peaceful. I dismissed the whispering as a figment of my imagination and returned to the living room. But the sinister voices persisted, growing louder and more sinister. It was as though they were crawling out from the very walls of the house. My heart pounding, I decided to investigate further. As I stepped into the hallway, the voices became clearer, their words distinct and malevolent. They were speaking in a language I couldn't understand, a series of harsh, guttural sounds that filled me with dread. I followed the voices to the basement door, which stood slightly ajar. The whispers were coming from below, like a cacophony of tortured souls. I knew I should have called the police, but curiosity and fear held me in place. With trembling hands, I pushed open the basement door and descended the creaky stairs. The voices grew louder with each step, their intensity building into a chilling crescendo. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a dimly lit basement that seemed to stretch on forever. In the center of the room stood a decrepit mirror, its glass cracked and tarnished. It was in front of this mirror that the voices seemed to converge, swirling and coalescing into a shadowy figure. As I approached the mirror, I realized with horror that the figure was me, or rather, a grotesque, twisted version of myself. Its eyes glowed with malevolence, and its distorted voice spoke in a language that sent waves of terror through me. I tried to turn away, to flee from the basement, but an unseen force held me in place. The figure in the mirror continued to whisper, its words growing clearer. It spoke of darkness and despair, of a descent into madness from which there was no escape. With a final, gut-wrenching scream, I broke free from the mirror's grasp and stumbled up the stairs, out of the basement, and into the safety of the living room. As I caught my breath, I realized that the voices had ceased, and the basement was once again silent. The storm outside had subsided, and the house seemed normal, as though nothing had happened. When Mrs. Anderson returned, I couldn't bring myself to tell her what had transpired. I was left with a haunting memory of that night, a memory of voices from the darkness and a sinister mirror that seemed to reflect the very depths of my soul. I never babysat for the Andersons again, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had glimpsed something beyond the realm of the living, something that should have remained hidden in the shadows. To this day, I wonder about that basement mirror and the sinister voices that emanated from it. I wonder if it was a glimpse into a darker, hidden reality, a reality that I was never meant to see. Story 2. Babysitting was a routine part of my teenage years, a way to earn some pocket money while dealing with the everyday antics of children. I had looked after numerous kids, but one particular babysitting job turned into an experience that defied explanation and left me bewildered. I was 18, and the Garfield family had been regular clients of mine for quite some time. They had 2 children, Emily, a precocious 8-year-old, and Owen, a rambunctious 6-year-old. Both kids were well behaved, and babysitting them had always been a breeze. One Saturday night, Mr. and Mrs. Garfield contacted me with an urgent request. They explained that they had to attend a family emergency out of town and needed someone to watch the kids for the night. Despite having plans, I agreed to help out, sensing the desperation in their voices. As Mr. and Mrs. Garfield hastily packed their bags, they handed me a list of instructions, emergency contact numbers, and a quick rundown of the kids' bedtime routines. Before leaving, they hugged Emily and Owen tightly, promising to be back the following day. The evening began like any other babysitting session. We played board games, had dinner, and watched a movie. Emily and Owen were in high spirits, and their laughter filled the house. But as the night wore on and bedtime approached, things took a bizarre turn. It started with a soft, almost imperceptible whispering. At first, I thought it was my imagination playing tricks on me, but the whispering grew louder and more distinct. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. The sound seemed to be coming from the hallway just outside the kids' bedrooms. As I followed the eerie whispers, I noticed a faint, otherworldly glow emanating from beneath Owen's bedroom door. My heart pounded as I pushed open the door. The room was bathed in an ethereal blue light, and the whispers seemed to be coming from an antique mirror on Owen's dresser. The mirror was old, with an ornate frame covered in intricate patterns. The whispers were now coming from the mirror itself, and I watched in awe as the glass surface rippled like water. My reflection appeared distorted and wavering, as if it were being pulled into the mirror. I took a step closer, my breath quickening. The whispers grew more urgent, as though pleading for something. And then, to my astonishment, a figure materialized within the mirror, a figure that looked exactly like me, but with hollow eyes and a malevolent grin. The figure reached out from the mirror, its hand passing through the glass and extending toward me. Terrified, I stumbled backward, falling onto Owen's bed. The figure in the mirror seemed to be trying to escape, its movements frantic and desperate. Panicked, I grabbed the mirror and tried to wrench it from the dresser. The whispers grew deafening, and the room seemed to spin around me. I felt a presence in the mirror, a malevolent force that threatened to engulf me. With all my strength, I pulled the mirror from the dresser, shattering it into pieces. The room was plunged into darkness, and the whispers ceased. I was left breathless and shaken, staring at the broken shards of the mirror. I couldn't stay in that room any longer. I rushed to Emily's bedroom and checked on both kids, who were sleeping peacefully. I decided to call Mr. and Mrs. Garfield and inform them of the bizarre incident. When they returned home, I recounted the strange encounter, my voice trembling with fear. They exchanged worried glances and thanked me for taking care of their children. They assured me that they would dispose of the broken mirror and that I should go home and get some rest. I left their house that night, my mind filled with questions and a sense of unease. I never babysat for the Garfield family again, and I never received an explanation for the mysterious mirror and the unsettling whispers, a babysitter's inexplicable and haunting encounter with the unknown. Story 3. I'm Rebecca, and this is a story I've hesitated to share for years. It's a tale of a babysitting job that turned into a nightmarish ordeal, a night when I came face to face with something beyond my understanding. I was 19 years old at the time, looking for ways to earn some extra cash during the summer break. Babysitting was a familiar gig for me, and I'd watched over various children in my neighborhood without any unusual incidents. That was until I received a call from Mrs. Anderson, a widow with a young son named Nathan. Nathan was a bright, imaginative 8-year-old, always eager to tell stories about his adventures at school and in the nearby woods. Mrs. Anderson explained that she had an unexpected family emergency and needed someone to look after Nathan for the night. She sounded desperate, and out of sympathy, I agreed to help. I arrived at their quaint, 2-story home just as the sun was setting. Mrs. Anderson quickly introduced me to Nathan, who had a mop of unruly brown hair and a penchant for asking endless questions. She provided a list of instructions, emergency numbers, and a reminder that Nathan had a bedtime of 9 p.m. As soon as Mrs. Anderson left, Nathan and I settled into the living room to watch a movie and enjoy some pizza. The evening started out just like any other babysitting job, with laughter and chatter filling the room. But as the night grew darker, things began to take a chilling turn. It started with Nathan, who suddenly fell silent and stared at the hallway leading to his bedroom with wide, fearful eyes. I asked him what was wrong, but he only whispered, "The shadows, Rebecca. They're moving." I looked down the hallway, but it appeared normal. I assumed he was simply spooked by the dark and tried to reassure him. "It's just your imagination, Nathan. There's nothing to be afraid of." But as I turned my attention back to the TV, I saw it too, a shadowy figure, darker than the surrounding darkness, moving across the hallway. My heart skipped a beat, and I wondered if it was just a trick of the light. I decided to investigate, believing that there must be a logical explanation. Nathan clung to my arm as we walked down the hallway, and I turned on the hallway light to reveal nothing. No shadows, no movement, just the ordinary hallway. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking we had both imagined it. I tucked Nathan into bed and assured him that everything was fine. He seemed to calm down, and as I turned off the light and left his room, I thought the worst was behind us. Back in the living room, I settled onto the couch, still shaken by the strange incident. I tried to distract myself by watching TV, but an uneasy feeling gnawed at me. The house seemed to creak and groan, its silence becoming oppressive. Around 9 p.m., I went to check on Nathan. He was sound asleep, his face serene. I couldn't help but smile at the sight, thinking that the shadows and the strange feeling were nothing more than a one-time scare. But as I turned to leave his room, a guttural whisper echoed through the darkness. It was a voice I couldn't understand, speaking in hushed, eerie tones. I spun around, searching for the source, but there was no one there. The whispering continued, growing louder and more insistent. It filled the room, coming from all directions, as though the very walls were speaking. I rushed to Nathan's bedside, worried that he might be having a nightmare, but he slept soundly, undisturbed by the chilling whispers. I couldn't stay in that room a moment longer. I fled, closing the door behind me, hoping to escape the inexplicable terror that had gripped the house. Back in the living room, I contemplated calling Mrs. Anderson, but I couldn't bring myself to disturb her during her family emergency. As I sat alone in the darkened living room, The whispers seemed to follow me. They grew more frantic, filled with an incomprehensible urgency. I felt a presence in the room, an unseen force that watched and waited. Terrified and unsure of what to do, I tried to drown out the whispers by turning up the TV volume. But the voices persisted, drowning out the sound of the television. I felt trapped, as though the very walls were closing in on me. I considered leaving the house, but a sense of responsibility for Nathan kept me rooted to the spot. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the whispering stopped. The house was once again silent, and the shadows seemed to retreat, leaving me in darkness. Exhausted and shaken, I stayed in the living room until Mrs. Anderson returned in the early hours of the morning. I hesitated to share my terrifying experience, fearing she might think I was crazy. As I prepared to leave, Mrs. Anderson thanked me for looking after Nathan and paid me for my services. She appeared oblivious to the strange events of the night, and I couldn't bring myself to tell her what I had witnessed. I left that house, vowing never to return. The memory of the chilling whispers and the shadowy figures still haunts my dreams. I can't explain what happened that night, but I know I'll never forget the haunting shadows of babysitting for the Andersons.